everybody, Stephanie here, aka Wolfpack, and this is part 3 of me reading Deck by Carol Higgins Clark. Chapter 7. Monday, June 22nd, London. Not for the first time in their 35 years of marriage did Nora Reagan Riley wish that somewhere along the way Luke had learned to pick up the pace of his speech. That thought was followed by acknowledgement that she had fallen in love on their first date with his Jimmy Stewart looks and vocal pattern. She eyed him affectionately and then anxiously glanced at her watch. They had been just about to follow the bellman out of their suite in London's Stafford Hotel when the phone rang. It was Hubert Kelly, director of the Summit branch of the Riley Funeral Homes of New Jersey, and he had a problem. The 90-year-old widow of a 98-year-old former mayor was insisting that her husband be laid out in the central parlor. Unfortunately, it had been a bad week for retired politicians in Summit, and the main parlor would be occupied for the next day and a half by a former congressman. Usually, Kelly would have taken care of this matter without bothering Luke, but this was truly a delicate situation. Mrs. Shaw was the recognized matriarch of the awesomely large Shearer clan and had been Luke's first important client when he bought then the struggling mortuary the year he and Nora were married. That was when, as Miss Shaw put it, her Octorian mother had been gathered by God. The other funeral parlor in town doesn't make people look nice and natural, she told Luke, and had given him the chance to make Mother took as pretty and content as she was when she watched the Ed Sullivan show every Sunday night. She always looked forward to it. Luke knew she had also checked out his big parking lot out back. He had worked hard on his first big client. It paid off. The deceased looked as though Topo Gingo had just performed an encore. Since then, the Riley Funeral Home of Summit had been handling the arrangements for members of the Shai dynasty, most of whom lived to truly great age. A few had even lasted long enough to see snapshots of their century-old visions flashed on television by Wilbur Scott of the Today Show. Thirsty for him, Luke had explained the problem to Nora to stop her from pacing back and forth in front of him. The normal situation would be simply to combine the two medium-sized viewing rooms, which were separated by a sliding door. As Nora knew, Mrs. Shea would consider that a second-best solution. "Tell her the next Shaw funeral is on the house," Nora hissed. "Look, we're going to miss the boat." Luke's glance was reproachful, and as usual he came up with a solution. "Hubert, remind Mrs. Shaw that Dennis's favorite color was green, and we've just redecorated those two rooms in green. He'll rest more comfortably there. After all, green and white were his campaign colors." "You're a freaking genius," Nora said as Luke hung up the phone. "Another problem solved that Riley's remains." "Bad enough I had to hear that kind of talk from our daughter. It's positively obscene to hear it from her mother's lips." They grinned at each other. At 5'4", Nora often felt dwarfed by her husband, who was a foot taller. "You're a bigger person than I am in every way," she was fond of telling him. "You don't lie about your age." Luke was 65 to her 58. She could never keep track of what age she had told interviewers she was. "But Mrs. Riley," one of them had said recently, 3 years ago you told me you were 52. And Nora's hair color was a dishonest blonde. Luke's, silver, was natural. "Now can we please get out of here?" she begged. The phone rang again. "I don't care if they're looking for a room for the Pope. We've got to get out of here." Luke reached for the phone, but Nora beat him to it. "Hello?" Reagan, honey, nothing's wrong, is it? I can't talk now. We'll have to call you from the ship. You what? Why? What? Good God, I never thought I'd deny my own child. But I guess it's never too late to start. Gotta run, see you there, love. She hung up quickly. See her where? Luke demanded. What's that all about? Nora began to laugh. You'll never believe it. I'll tell you in the car. Chapter 8. Southampton. The passenger check-in for the Queen Guinevere was located in the vast waiting room between the boat, train, and the dock. Cameron Hardwick had been told the ship was booked to near capacity and wondered if he missed the old lady in a disorganized crowd of 1,200 people trying to find the appropriate desk for registration. The areas were broken down by class of passenger and then alphabetically. He had been one of the early check-ins at the front desk, first class desk, then sat on a nearby bench, obscenely deep in the morning paper as fellow passengers milled around, chatted, complained, and introduced themselves as they waited for the boarding announcement. One and all seemed to be laden down with totes, carry-on cases, shopping bags with Harrod's name embezzled in gold. The first boarding call sounded, and the crowd began to surge toward the dock. The lines at the check-in desk thinned. Was the old lady going to miss the trip? The request came over the loudspeaker for all remaining passengers to board immediately. And then he saw her. There was no missing her. The old girl looked as though she had a sailor's uniform on, white pants, a dark blue top loaded with brass buttons and anchor emblems, and a stripped blue and white overseas cap. For her age, she should certainly move fast. She rushed up to the first class desk like a runner crossing the finish line. Smashing, smashing, she cried. We made it. The van broke down three times on M5, created a most dreadful traffic jam. All those rude people honking and honking. Her voice echoed through the cavernous room, almost drowning out the Scottish bagpipes, who had just snuck up their noisy welcome on the dock. My expected guest, Miss Penelope Antwater, is presently in a wretched state. She waved vaguely in her midsection. Tummy problems, don't you see? He was awed. He was aware that everybody in the general area, as well as the clerk attending to Lady Exner, had the same dumbfounded expression. Miss Regan Riley will share the voyage with me. It's quite all right. Her passport is in order. She'll be along directly. There are quite a few carry-on bags. I have tons of presents for my dear little nieces, whom I've never met. The clerk finally managed to interrupt the torment. Your name, madame? Oh, dear me, of course, Exner. Lady Exner, Veronica. Perhaps you heard of my husband, Sir Gilbert Exner. He died 40 years ago. He was an unpublished poet. The last stragglers were hurrying to board the ship. Hardwick did not want to be seen staring at Lady Exner. He would have to wait to get a look at the companion. Just as he turned away, he heard Lady Exner's ringing order. There you are, Regan. Step smartly. We mustn't miss the boat. He glanced back over his shoulder and managed to get a good look at Lady Exner's new companion. From behind the mound of packages, he could see that she was young and pretty. As he reached for his boarding card, he realized that his immediate instinct was that she was also very sharp. This would not be easy. In the background, he could still hear Lady Exner. She was thanking someone for driving her in. I do hope you get home without further difficulty, Edwin. There's a little tea left in the thermos on the back seat. Oh, dear, Regan tells me I drank it. There was just one couple ahead of him in the first-class entry. A tall, lanky man with silver hair and a small, blonde woman. The ship's photographer was about to take their picture. Hardwick cursed under his breath. He did not want his picture taken, but it might look conspicuous if he to refuse it. He would insist on keeping on his dark glasses. When the photographer snapped the picture, he turned his head to the side. He tried to sound general when the photographer said, "Let's take another one." "No, really, one's enough." He walked up the ramp and stepped onto the ship. Members of the staff had formed a receiving line to greet the boarding passengers. Piano music was playing in the background. He hung around near the top of the ramp until he saw Lady Exner posing excitedly for the photographer, her arm draped around her young companion, a sea of packages at their feet. The couple he had followed up the ramp was standing near him. The woman was laughing. "It should be an interesting trip, Luke." "You bet it will be," Hardwick thought grimly. Chapter 9. At Sea. The Camelot suite was one of two ultra-deluxe penthouses at the top of the ship. Lady Exner fluttered around admiring the pale blue Motrov as Regan began unpacking. Her own two suitcases she set aside, electing instead to take on the awesome task of organizing the wildly electric contents of Victoria's luggage. She decided that Victoria must have emptied every closet in Llewellyn Hall into the numerous Gucci bags. One oversized valise she opened and closed immediately. It smelled of mothballs and was filled with heavy woolen garments, tweed walking suits, fur-lined boots, woolen gloves, and a black velvet cape. "Victoria, are you sure we're not on the world cruise?" Victoria was examining one of the closets. "Regan, if we should hit an iceberg just as the Titanic did, we must rush directly here for our life preserves. Do you think we should try them on now? What do you ask?" "What did you ask? Oh, dear. That's one of the bags I lent Penelope. Philip must have gathered it up by mistake." Regan felt relieved. "My woolies are in a different case. I thought we could leave some winter clothes at my niece's for future visits. And, of course, I'm always worried about a cold snap. But never mind about unpacking now. You haven't even gone out on our private deck. We're about to set sail. Let's go wave to the poor people on the deck. On the dock who won't be accompanying us." At this point, Regan wondered if it wouldn't be so bad to be one of those poor dear people. Luxurious as the suite was, she had been surprised to see that it was really one large open room with two levels and one king-size bed. Just inside the cabin door, there was a small foyer with a bath to the left. Directly ahead was the bedroom with another bath in it. 3 steps up to the right was a sitting room with sliding doors that opened onto the private terrace. The huge windows offered a breathtaking view of the Atlantic. I want my own bed," Regan thought. "I want to be able to roll over 10 times a night without worrying about being mistaken for Sir Gilbert. Polite sleeping for the next 5 nights sounded exhausting." Victoria was sweet, but sharing a bed was just too much. Regan prayed that the couch was a Benedict Castro special. She followed Victoria out onto the deck, which was the highest point of the ship, and stretched almost completely to the bow. The front end looked over the roof of the bridge. Victoria pointed to it. "That's where the captain and all those handsome officers guide us into the wild blue yonder." The deep boom of the ship's whistle signaled the beginning of the voyage. Victoria rushed to the railing of the balcony and began to wave her overseas cap vigorously in the direction of the dock. The Scottish bagpipers, in one final burst of energy, whined a tiny version of sailing over the Bounty main. Victoria sniffed the air appreciatively. "Aren't the sea breeze invigorating?" "There is something magical about setting sail, Victoria." Reagan agreed as she breathed in the salty air. And now I just want to get the rest of the unpacking out of the way. And I shall just stand here and watch the merriment below. From their perch they could lean over the railing and observed the promenade deck 2 floors down, where excited voyagers were still waving and shouting to their friends and relatives. Well, don't lean too far, Reagan warned, as she started back inside. Do pop that lovely bottle of champagne the captain sent us, Victoria ordered. We must toast our journey. Reagan thought this might be the best idea Victoria had since she decided to marry a wealthy knight who had only taken up 2 weeks of her time. Victoria quaffed down the bubbly contents of her glass before Reagan could even pour her own. She extended it for a refill. Now, for our toast. Reagan remembered that Philip had warned her that Victoria could not tolerate much alcohol, but she reasoned she could hardly refuse, and she was safe enough here. She filled both glasses and dutifully clicked hers with Victoria's, who sang, "Bon voyage, dear Reagan, bon voyage." As Reagan took her first sip of the blubblies, tickled her nose. "Good stuff, Victoria." "No, sorry, Veronica. It goes down like water, my dear." Reagan prudently carried the bottle back inside. She was taking no chances on leaving it with Victoria. "Geez Louise, Veronica, wow. I'm so sorry." And she wanted to keep busy. The sight of all the happy people saying goodbye to their loved ones suddenly made her feel sad. What were Athena's parents doing right now, knowing that their daughter was never coming home? She tried to push the thought away as she filled the dresser drawers. "I've got to make the best of this," she told herself. "It is Veronica's vacation. Next week I'll go over every line of my journal. Maybe I'll find something that will help Lewiston." That led her to wondering whether Jeff was back in Los Angeles. When she left, he'd been on vacation in Canada shooting a miniseries. Reagan had intentionally hired him to help out in her offices and go along with her on servants' lists when he was between acting jobs. "You're getting too serious, too famous for me," she told him recently. "I can't take you along because people recognize you." But he was always available to bounce ideas off, and he'd been a real help in cracking some of her cases. "Detective work is just like acting," he said. "You've got to figure out the character's motivation." She had just jammed the last suitcase in the overhead closet when she heard Victoria shriek, "Monica! Monica, I say, is that you?" Reagan whirled around to see Veronica's body, bent horseshoe-shaped over the railing. She raced outside as the chorus of "Be careful!" from the promenade deck. She locked her arms around Victoria's dangling thighs and yanked her back. "My God, Veronica, what are you doing?" Veronica seemed oblivious to the danger. "That woman in pink hat, isn't that Monica after all? But what a startling resemblance! If you leaned over any more, that hat would have been squashed into a beanie," Reagan said. "Please, Veronica, you must be careful." "Is everything quite all right up there?" someone shouted. "Lovely, just lovely," Veronica yelled down to the dozens of distant staring faces. She gave Reagan a glassy-eyed smile. "I hope the rest of the champagne is still nicely chilled, my dear." Cameron Hardwick had checked to see which dining room they had chosen and was gravely satisfied to learn that they were at the table of 10 in the King Arthur, the largest of the first-class restaurants. It solved the problem of getting close to them without seeming overt. He had been assigned to a non-smoking table and had asked to be switched to a smoking section. Together with a maitre d', he studied the seating chart. Trying to seem casual, he pointed to the community table directly at the window on the starboard side. There were 8 names listed, including Lady Exner's. "That table looks as though it has a great view. Any chance you could put me there?" The maitre d', a suave, slender man with a seemingly prenuptial smile, was delighted to accommodate him. Already working on his tip, no doubt, Cameron thought. It always gave him pleasure to stiff the help whenever possible. Now he would make it his business to get into the dining room directly behind that old bat and Regan Riley, and make sure he was seated next to them. Chapter 10. Eventually, Lady Exner took to her bed for an afternoon nap, which gave Regan a welcome break. She had hoped to sneak down to the next deck, where Luke and Nora had a first-class cabin, but after the episode of Veronica's near swan dive, decided not to leave her. Instead, she stretched out in the trace on the deck and reviewed the incredible events of the past 48 hours. The realization that Athena had probably not caught the train to London that Friday night, but had been murdered right in Oxford, was beginning to fill her with guilt. Athena had asked her to come down to the pub next to the train station, the Bull and Bear, and have a drink before she caught her train. As the memory of those final moments came back to an ever sharper focus, Regan thought, I almost went with her. But I didn't want to take the time. I was so glad she was leaving for a couple of days, and I wouldn't have to listen to her non-stop complaining about St. Polycarp's and the English weather. The ship was moving smoothly. The breeze was strong. Regan shivered and pulled on her sweatshirt. Livingston had asked her to try and remember anything at all that might be helpful in the investigation. Luke and Nora always teased her that she could remember everything from the time she was 3. Regan leaned back, closed her eyes, and from the investigative viewpoint began to recall the academic year she had spent in historic Oxford with Athena as her roommate. Athena so seldom went to parties. She never dedicated interest in any of the students. I never remember her going on a date, Regan thought. So who would want to kill her? Chapter 11. Luke and Nora spent a pleasant afternoon. After unpacking in the cabin, they went to the sports deck for a drink and snack, and then settled in deck chairs with their books. This is heaven, Nora murmured as she stared out, hypnotized by the sight of the open sea. It is so nice to read somebody else's book instead of talking about one of mine. She had been keynote speaker at a mystery convention in Spain and had followed that with an intense schedule of newspaper, magazine, and television interviews in Italy and France. Luke nodded. Well, I've had enough of waiting in green rooms for a while. Then he frowned. Speaking of green rooms, I wonder if Miss Shaw is satisfied with the arrangement for Dennis. Maybe I better call and find out. Luke, it's not exactly a matter of life and death. Luke chuckled as he enjoyed one of the oldest and, as Regan pointed out, corniest jokes they shared. I see your point. They returned to their books. Luke ordered another round of pina coladas, and they remained comfortably encouraged until 4:30, when the breeze turned sharply cooler. At that point, there was a general flurry of activity as the occupants of the pool and scattered deck chairs began to gather the belongings, leaving the sports deck to the shuffleboard and paddle tennis players. As they meandered back to their cabin, they passed a group of children being led around the deck by 2 youth counselors. Seems crazy to know Regan is on this ship, and we have to avoid her, Nora said wistfully. Well, maybe we can get a table for 4, and you can spend the whole time taking notes for Lady Exner's totally unauthorized biography, Luke suggested. God forbid, Nora exclaimed. That reminds me, Regan warned me to make sure we are not sitting too near them in the dining room. Lady Eagle Eye might recognize me from my pictures on the book jackets. The seating chart showed them to be in the non-smoking section, well out of view of anyone at Lady Exner's table. "Regan is in the smoking section?" Nora said, with not a little surprise in her voice. "I wonder if Lady Exner has shared that little jewel with her yet." "She'll be all right," Luke observed. "Knowing Regan, after dinner she'll drag Lady Exner out for a walk on the deck to get some fresh air in her lungs." "A midnight stroll with an 80-year-old woman," Nora said. "That Walker boy she was dating was so nice. If she only given him half a chance. I do so want a grand—" I know," Luke interrupted. "Let's go." Chapter 12. Gavin Gray dressed for dinner carefully. It had been a tremendous relief to see Mrs. Watkins totter off the ship this morning, still wildly protesting the loss of her $1 million bracelet. She had posted a reward of $50,000, which had every steward, waiter, and lackey walking around the ship with their eyes peeled like a collection of hopeful lottery players waiting for their numbers to come up. "Don't waste your time," he had thought. "I'm going to be the $1 million winner. But there won't be any press conference to announce it." He deplored those idyllic television appearances of lottery winners surrounded by long-lost relatives and hooty-dooty grins. There was, of course, the obstacle of retrieving the bracelet from the Camelot suite. He had already found out that Lady Veronica Exner and her female companion would be staying there. It was good news that it was to be occupied by 2 women. The fear had lurked in the back of his mind that it would be inhabited on his crossing by a honeymooning couple who couldn't come up for air until the skyline of New York City was in sight. But 2 women, he'd probably end up dancing with them anyway. The first night out meant informal dress. Gavin laid out a pale yellow linen jacket and white slacks. His tie in place to his satisfaction, he pulled on his jacket and studied himself in the full-length mirror. Not bad, he reasoned. The facelift he had 2 years ago was still holding up. In fact, it looked even better. That bargain-rate plastic surgeon had pulled the skin around his eyes so tight he could have blinded himself with dental floss. The jacket hid his thickening waistline. Then he frowned. Its lemon-yellow tone accentuated the orangish shade of his just-colored hair. The girl at the salon on 2 deck had been too busy gossiping about the missing bracelet to notice the timer on the dryer had gone off. Gavin had dozed, and by the time he woke up, the dye had been on an extra 20 minutes. "I look like a pumpkin head," he thought angrily. "Oh, forget it. Next week I'll go to my hairdresser in New York." With that thought, a wave of anxiety washed over him. He was not booked as a host again until September. If he didn't retrieve the bracelet in the next few days, he wouldn't have another chance. As he headed for the door of the cabin, he felt the undulating movement of the ship accelerate. Was it going to be another rough crossing? Then Gavin smiled. If so, maybe Lady Veronica Exner and her companion would need a steady arm to guide them back to the Camelot suite. Chapter 13. At 7 p.m., dressed in a lavender and white silk print by Mary Beth Dowry, her favorite new designer, Regan sat waiting on the sofa, which she had been thrilled to discover was indeed a pullout. "Thank you, Burdett Castro," she thought as she watched Veronica flutter around, trying on and rejecting various accessories. Regan had convinced Lady Exner that nobody dressed in formal evening wear the first night out. Reluctantly, Veronica had abandoned the silver lame ball gown in which she planned to make her grand entrance. Instead, she settled for a simple blue crepe, one of the few items in her wardrobe that did not seem inspired by the drug culture. With rapt attention, Veronica again sprayed her already stiffened blonde hair. Reagan had been keeping count. That was the 12th time in the last 15 minutes. Reagan was about to warn Veronica that it was getting late when Veronica reached for her purse. Reagan stood up as Veronica squealed. I almost forgot. What is it, Veronica? Reagan asked. Your medicine? No, no, no. My cigarette holder. Veronica reached into the top drawer of the boudoir and pulled out a leather case. She unzipped it and shook out a highly polished silver cigarette holder and an open pack of Benson and Hedges. Veronica, I've never seen you smoke. Of course I don't smoke. I simply give the appearance, Veronica answered gaily as she jammed a stale-looking cigarette into the holder. Reagan asked, why? On our trips, Penelope and I sit at a group table whenever possible. The non-smokers' table is always filled with truly re-informed smokers who never want to have any fun. The people at the smokers' table have a reckless edge, which I find intriguing. Not a great commercial for the American Cancer Society, Reagan thought, as she tucked another allergy pill in her purse. As they stared down the hall to the small elevator which only served the two penthouses, the night steward approached them, tall, stick-thin, with round glasses resting on his shiny nose and slick-back brown hair. He looked to Reagan like a college freshman. His voice had a hint of cockney as he asked if everything was satisfactory. After assuring him that it was, Veronica inquired about the occupants of the other suite. I'm so anxious to meet them, Veronica bubbled. Do you know who they are? The elevator arrived, and the steward held the door open for them. The suite is empty this crossing. You'll have total privacy up here, he released the door. Enjoy your dinner. Chapter 14. At 5 minutes before 7 o'clock, Cameron Hardwick was ready to leave for the cocktail lounge adjacent to the King Arthur dining room. He knew it was customary for many passengers to enjoy an aperitif before dinner, but in any case, everyone assigned to the King Arthur had to pass through the lounge. He wanted to be situated where he could follow Lady Exner into the dining room and place himself, if not actually next to her, as near as possible. The companion, he reflected, looked like she was in her mid to late 20s. Would it be smart to play up to her? Cameron considered. Maybe. Carefully, he examined his image in the mirror and frowned at the slight crease in his collar. Nobody knows how to do laundry anymore, he thought. At least the valet had done a decent job pressing his jacket and slacks. He liked to wear the seemingly ageless combination of a blue blazer, light blue shirt, striped tie, and khaki pants. His bally loafers had the gleam of shoes right out of the box. They weren't new, but he was meticulous about every detail of his wardrobe. He was ready to go. He gave one last admiring glance into the mirror at the deeply tanned, good-looking guy he saw there. As always, the litany of praise he heard from women echoed through his head. The blonde at the concierge table in Monaco, who had slipped him her phone number while her boyfriend lost another hand of black jacket. Don't ever stop scowling, Heathcliff, she purred, the rich college kid in London. Boys my age are so immature, not like you. The 50-ish widow he latched on to in Portugal. It's no fun to go out to the casinos alone. My husband was also tall and lean and handsome. He soaked into the gushing or whispered admiration while he escorted them to the high-stakes table and later collected his share of their losses. But for the last few years he realized that his own luck was subtly changing. He hadn't had a big win in too long. The women didn't mind paying for dinner or the suite, but they weren't as free with their cash anymore. He needed major bucks, the kind that would put the sense of being a winner back in his hands when he was dealt the cards. That was why when this opportunity was presented to him, he grabbed it. It must be in the cards, he had thought. It's linked to my first bonanza. The trophy of that first job was in the safe in his New York apartment. He'd only worn it once in public, that dazzling pocket watch with its equally beautiful fob, both encrusted with gemstones, ancient, priceless, created for a Doge of Venice in the 16th century. He had argued that it would be too dangerous to sell it anymore. That was on every list of stolen jewelry all over the world. That inevitably it would be traced back to him. Not true, of course. He wanted it for himself. He wanted to be able to put it on when he was alone, wear it with that brocaded dressing gown that closely resembled the ornate robes of the Doge, and the image that he was the master of Venice, the one who had built St. Mark's Cathedral as a private chapel. Turning from the mirror, Cameron walked to the dresser, snapped on the Rolodex watch that was a poor substitute for the hidden treasure, and reached for his card case. No, he thought as he put them back, I'm not handing these out to anyone on this ship. His cards, discreet in exquisite taste with raised lettering on fine paper stock, gave his home address, 66 Grimsey Park South, New York City. No one needed to know he was in the rent-established walk-up. He had been starting enough technically to live with his father and never take a place of his own. The bitchy owners hadn't been able to repossess the apartment when the old drunk finally passed out for the last time. His occupation was listed as personal investment counselor, which never failed to impress, and which satisfied any curiosity about his lack of direct business commitment. Cameron felt good. He was getting the sense he was on a winning streak. By the end of the trip, 2 bodies would be bobbing around in the Atlantic. As he started for the cocktail lounge, he envisioned the moment when his $200,000 in cash was placed in his hand. Chapter 15. Gavin Gray entered the cocktail lounge and looked around with an experienced eye. Not a very interesting group, he thought. There was the usual assortment of couples, some with the air of seasoned travelers, some overly dressed for the first night, beaming with joy, overwhelmed by their good fortune at being one of the 1/2 of the 1% of the people on Earth who could afford to sail across the Atlantic. They probably never ridden anything bigger than the Staten Island ferry before, Gavin thought, dismissing them. It would be easy to avoid that type. They undoubtedly spent most of their time writing postcards that all started with, "Wish you were here." He was displeased to see that several tables in the lounge had been pushed together. A group of 16 or so occupied them, and already their laughter was becoming raucous. Gavin deplored the tendency of companies to reward their top salesmen with first-class cruises. There was something so essentially vulgar about brushing shoulders with people who were only on board because they had succeeded in unloading a quantity of snowmobiles or garage door openers on gullible buyers. After all, when cruising really started in the 1920s, it was meant for the very elite who brought along their servants and were treated like royalty. He had voiced those thoughts to someone on the last crossing, and his listener, a 20-ish, leggy blonde, had said, "Well, at least they're paying. One of the ship's officers told me you have a free ride in exchange for dancing and playing bingo with blue-haired old ladies." Too late Gavin had found out that the leggy blonde was the daughter of a beefy head of the AI Sales Winners Club. He ordered a gin and tonic and stood at the bar. There were 3 or 4 sets of harpies guzzling their vodkas. He recognized Salvi Arden, the divorcee who had made countless crossings looking for a rich husband. 2 trips ago she had confided that her cash was running pretty low. She had to get her hooks into somebody pretty soon. Too frantic, my dear, Gavin sometimes warned her. Calm it a bit. You blitz when you should be beguile. But he liked her. Sylvia was fun, and they both understood each other. Their surprisingly compound notes on the old bats he jollied along, and the old birds she tried to intimidate. Gavin sighed. Back to work, he decided. He had noticed a table where 2 six-year women were eyeing the crowd with avid glances. Rhett Butler can't make it, ladies, he thought as he drifted over to chat with them. He stopped abruptly when he saw the couple who were standing in the doorway of the lounge. Surely, of course it was Nora Reagan Riley. There was no mistaking her. That small, trim figure, that pretty face, that ash blonde hair, short and wavy. She'd been on his program several times, and had been one of the last guests he had just before it was canceled a year ago. And that was her husband, the funeral director. Talk about a lousy job. Gavin rushed to greet them, immediately assuming his talk show persona. Nora Reagan Riley, he boomed. Shh! Panic-stricken Nora and Luke whirled their heads around. They had spotted Reagan and Lady Exner stepping off the elevator and rushed to put a healthy distance between them. Of all the luck to meet Gavin, Nora thought. I'll never have any privacy on this trip. And oh God, here they come. Reagan and Lady Exner were less than 6 feet away. Reagan caught Nora's eye and began making frantic shooing motions with her hand. Fortunately, Lady Exner had paused to light a cigarette, and all her attention was devoted to the lighter, whose starter was clearly not responding to her vigorous thumb-snapping. Luke took Gavin's arm and propelled him into an isolated table. We've got something to let you in on, he explained in a low voice. They told it straight. Their daughter was on board, acting as a companion to an elderly woman, Lady Veronica Exner, whose goal in life was to have Nora collaborate on her memoirs. For that reason, they wanted no one to identify Mrs. Luke Riley as a mystery writer, Nora Reagan Riley. I'm sure she's a lovely person, Nora said, but we really took this cruise to unwind and be together. Gavin was sure he had died and gone to heaven. Nora Reagan Riley's daughter was Lady Exner's companion, and they were staying in the Camelot suite. It would be so easy to get friendly with them. His thoughts moved with lightning speed. I certainly understand your dilemma. My celebrity friends all cherish their privacy. Celebrity friends, Nora thought. The only people he's interested in. You'd think he hosted the Tonight Show instead of his dinky radio broadcast, which had about 3 listeners. Once she's been on, and he spent half the time begging the audience to call in with questions. Luke and Reagan had spent the whole half hour trying to find it on the dial. In vain, of course. And as for privacy, forget it. He couldn't help himself. He loved to name drop. Now, Gavin hunched over the table and his eye disappeared in a lengthy conspiratorial wink. It will be our little secret, he assured them. As a matter of fact, I believe I'm seated at their table. Do tell your daughter that I'll be happy to accompany Lady Exner to some of the activities. There's a psychic on board who inevitably attracts senior citizens to her sessions. Why, I'll never know. Gavin drained his glass and broke out his hearty show business laugh. Her specialty is preceding the future And since many of them look as though they won't live to see land again, her prediction should be limited to exactly when they'll be needing the services of someone like you, huh, Luke? No, Luke thought. You're the only stiff around here. Chapter 16. I don't need any more close calls like that, Reagan thought, and I don't want to be around when the maitre d' discovers that Veronica's cigarette singed the back of his jacket when he leaned over to look up our table number. Beautiful ladies, follow me, he smiled. 3 people were already seated at the spacious round table. A middle-aged couple who offered a big welcome, and a rail-thin, fashionably dressed frost blonde who could have been anywhere between 50 and 60. She was situated opposite of the couple. Good move, Reagan thought. No doubt the single woman had left plenty of empty seats around her, hoping they'd be filled in by that rare commodity on cruise ship, single men. The maitre d' seated Veronica and pulled out the chair to her left for Reagan. General introductions followed. Mario and Immaculata? Oh, good God. I can't say that last name, sorry guys. Announced they were taking their first cruise ever and had decided to go all out by traveling first class. The way I see it, Mario explained, I work for a swank hotel in Atlantic City and figure it was high time me and the missus got a taste of the good life. Besides, I'm the banquet office, maybe I can earn some brownie points by bringing back new ideas about a ship-style food and beverage service. Everyone tells me all you do on a cruise is eat. He patted his generous girth. I'm ready. Immaculate gazed at him with an adoring look that made Nancy Reagan swoon like crazy at Ron seem swirly. This is like a second honeymoon for us, she bubbled. Sylvie Arden was from Palm Springs. I love to travel, she said, but I hate packing and unpacking. That's why cruising is the perfect solution for me. You unpack once and then you just enjoy yourself. Good evening. Reagan and the others turned to see a sophisticated-looking, dark-haired man in his late 30s approach. Sylvie's eyes brightened as he chose a seat between her and Veronica. May I? He asked. Please do, Veronica and Sylvie chorused. A moment later, the seat to the left of Reagan was filled. A man about her father's age, wearing a lemon jacket, introduced himself as Gavin Gray and greeted the frosted blonde with the familiarity of old friends. So good to see you, Sylvie, he said. You two know each other? Veronica cried as she waved the cigarette holder, whipping it past Reagan's nose. Oh, yes, Gavin replied. We've been on many of these sea adventures together. You see, I am originally from Manhattan. For many years, I was the host of Gavin's Guests, a popular radio program in New York. I interviewed literally thousands of celebrities. Now that I'm retired, I have taken my interest in people into an affiliation with the cruise line. I am one of your hosts. Gavin Gray, Reagan thought. Gavin Gray. I've heard of his name. Of course, she's been in New York when Nora was on that program. Nora called him Gavin, and said she doubted he ever read a book before he interviewed the author. Reagan's heart sank. If he spotted Nora and talked to her about Veronica, that would be it. The dark-haired man on Veronica's right volunteered. I'm Cameron Hardwick from New York. His smile was pleasant. Veronica spoke for Reagan and herself. I am Lady Veronica Exner from Oxford, widow of the late Sir Gilbert Exner, and this is my dear friend Reagan Riley. Immacula, whatever that last name is, large brown eyes filled with understanding. Did you lose your husband recently? She asked tenderly. 40 years ago, Veronica said briskly, but then added, sometimes it feels like yesterday. Oh, brother, Reagan thought. Let's hope Immacula, what's her name, doesn't ask Veronica how long they were married. Reagan Riley, Gavin Gray mused. What a charming name. He gave her a knowing look and a hint of a wink. The captain, pad in hand, approached them. Do you care to order a beverage now? Lovely. It was obvious that Veronica had already become the self-appointed spokesman. But tell me, whose these two seats will be occupied? Her question was hopeful. Reagan couldn't help but notice that Sylvie Arden was trembling to hear the answer. Yes, they certainly will, called out one of two men circling the table and heading for the empty seats. He was about 5'9", an average build, with thinning brown hair flecked with gray, a matching mustache, and a horn-rimmed glasses that magnified amused, intelligent eyes. His companion was a couple of inches taller, a bit stockier, and his shiny black hair was pulled back into a ponytail fastened by a diamond clip. Both seemed to be in their early 40s. Reagan watched Sylvie's hopes dry up faster than a drop of water on a sizzling sidewalk as she realized that the newcomers were a couple. Oh, perfect timing, Veronica gushed. We're just about to order our sherry. I'm not having sherry, Mario protested. It gives him a headache, Immaculate rushed to explain. We usually have a mixed drink before dinner. It could be a tequila sunrise. It could be a rye and ginger. It could be an old-fashioned on special occasions. I get out the blender and start to make... Could we possibly place our orders? Cameron Hardwick interrupted, a hint of impatience in his voice. The first of the new arrivals was seated next to Immaculata. Quickly he turned to her, smiling warmly. Your suggestion of an old-fashioned is marvelous. Will you join us in one? Doesn't that sound good to you, Kenneth? The moment of tension passed as they gave their orders. You're a nice guy, Reagan thought, smiling across the table at the newcomer. And what about you, Cameron Hardwick, she wondered. You're a good-looking, well-dressed, and at that age where a lot of women should be chasing after you, and you're traveling alone? Why? You must be a jerk. The introductions began again. Reagan was relieved that on this go-around everyone just volunteered their names. The late arrivals went last. I'm Dale Cahoon, said the one with the glasses who had done all the talking, and this is my friend Kenneth Minard. Nice to meet you all, as he patted his hair behind his ears and adjusted his cuffs. Kenneth favored them with a nervous smile. All this rushing. Dale and I were on the deck working on our tans, and we were both so exhausted we felt dead asleep. We didn't have nearly enough time to get dressed for dinner properly. Poor Kenneth. Dale's tone was loving and sympathetic. I dragged him all over Europe hunting down antiques for my shop. We live in San Francisco. Antiques? Veronica eyes brightened. I adore browsing through antique shops. Browse must be all you do, Reagan thought. From the looks of Lowell Hall, the only real antique is the plumbing system. And what is your profession, Kenneth? Veronica inquired. She could sup for Barbara Walters, Reagan thought. I'm a hairstylist, Kenneth told her proudly. The drinks arrived. Cameron Hardwick began to chat with Lady Exner. Gavin Gray was listening to Mario and Immaculata's questions about the activities on the ship. Reagan glanced around, enjoying the gentle sway of the ship as it gracefully moved through the night. The room was decorated in a blue-green mauve, that suggested the ocean setting. Huge windows ran from the floor to ceiling on both the port and starboard sides. The moon was bright and glistened on the dark, murky seas. The tables were now filled, and the captains and waiters bustled as they took orders and carried silver-covered dishes. The sommelier, wearing an impressive key around his neck, was opening a bottle of Dom Pomeranian with a thermatical flair. At tables for two, some couples were smiling, others looked as though they had run out of conversation 20 years ago. A strolling violinist was winding his way through the room. A young couple signaled to him to come over to their table, where he played a musical selection with a great passion. Reagan looked over her shoulder. From where she was sitting, she could not spot Luke and Nora. "They're at the corner table by the pillar," Gavin Gray whispered. Reagan stared at him. "Excuse me?" His eye once again disappeared in a squiggly line. "I'm a dear friend of your mother and father," he hissed. "I had a drink with them in the lounge and understood the predicament. It will be our little secret." He grabbed her hand and squeezed it. His second week made Reagan wonder whether he was working his way into a nervous tic. She managed to withdraw her hand. She tried to wink back, but it felt ridiculous. "Reagan, do you have something in your eye?" Veronica asked. "No, I'm fine." Reagan reached for her glass of wine. "I only hope I can trust him," she thought. The captain took the dinner orders. Reagan, Lady Exner, and Gabby decided on the Quavan, something like that, as the main course. Kenneth and Dale ordered the rack of lamb. Cameron and Sylvie decided on a steak au poivre. Mario and Immacula had a terrible time choosing between the lamb and the steak. They finally agreed to order one of each and share. That's what I would do. Anyway, they also ordered onion soup. When the waiter was about to make his escape, Mario pulled him back and said, "You may as well give us some of them crab meat appetizers." Throughout the meal, the conversation varied between group talk and individual exchanges. Sylvie Arden bounced back from her initial disappointment at the slim pickings of eligible men and spoke knowledgeably with Dale Cahoon about Regency furniture. Except for his grunts of contentment, Mario didn't say a word during the meal. He meticulously mopped up every trace of liquid on his plate with a sourdough roll. Kenneth listened with admirable patience to Immacula's description of her adorable grandchildren. Concepcion, who is sort of named after me, and Mario the Third, the image of his father. She ordered Big Mario to pull out his wallet and pass their pictures around. Reagan smiled and murmured polite compliments about the two cherub-cheeked toddlers. Veronica was too busy trying to light yet another stale cigarette to do more than glance at the snapshots of the youngest, but I can't say that last name, sorry. She passed them on to Cameron Hardwick, who looked visibly pained and fired the collection at Sylvie. A waiter rushed to assist Veronica, who huffed and puffed until a dismal glow at the end of the cigarette rewarded her efforts. With that accomplished, Veronica launched into a rhapsody of how the late Senior Gilbert had always enjoyed Cove Avon. She went on to describe his life and times in minute detail, proclaiming him a Renaissance man who wrote beautiful poetry. When she finally ran out of breath, Sylvie quickly changed the subject by asking Gavin if the missing bracelet from last crossing had turned up. "Not that I know of," Gavin said, sounding a touch abrupt. "One of the stewards was telling me all about it," Sylvie confided. "I've made several crossings with Mrs. Wilkins. She wears so much jewelry she looks like a queen for a day. But that bracelet she lost was really something. They posted a $50,000 reward for whoever finds it." "What happened?" Veronica asked, sounding excited. "Gavin, you were there. You tell," Sylvie replied. "Well, I was on the ship," Gavin answered with a defensive tone, then quickly resumed the demur of a gentle host. "Apparently it fell off her wrist. It was the night of the captain's party. Who knows? Anyone could have picked it up. From what the steward tells me, they ripped the ship apart looking for it," Sylvie insisted. "Mrs. Watkins travels frequently on this line," she explained to everyone at the table. "I must have met her a dozen times. She spends money like water and always books the Camelot suite." "That's where we're staying!" Veronica cried. "Reg and I are all alone up there. I was hoping we'd have neighbors, but the suite across the hall is empty." She puffed on her cigarette. "I'll have to keep my eye out for the hidden treasure." "The steward is convinced that the bracelet went off the ship in someone's luggage," Sylvie continued. They're sure whoever found it kept it. I know it was worth a fortune, but I thought it was awfully garish. Antique jewelry is the only jewelry worth having, Cameron Hardwick commented. The real craftsman died a couple of 100 years ago. I have a friend who deals in antique jewelry, who agrees with you, Dale said. Do you collect? I have one or two interesting pieces, Hardwick replied with a knowing smile. It was only after Mario and Immacula had finished their horn of plenty, a dessert described on the menu as a symphony of fresh fruit and puff pastry on raspberry sauce, and were sipping their cappuccino that Immaculate jumped back into the conversation, picking up where Sylvie had left off. There's nothing worse than being robbed. Such an invasion. Last year, when we were visiting Mario Jr. and Roz and the children, they live about 20 miles from us. We ended up staying the night. It was an act of God that car didn't start. Mario Jr. offered to lend us his car, but it had a stick shift, and Big Mario hadn't driven one of those in 30 years, so we ended up staying in the guest room. That way we could get the car fixed in the morning and be on our way. The Munchkins loved it when we stayed over. That very night our own home was robbed. My neighbor noticed a car parked in front at around 11 o'clock. That was exactly the time we would have arrived if our car had started. Who knows? We could have walked in on them and been killed. I knew something was wrong the minute we pulled in the driveway, and there was Mario's old dentures on the welcome mat. His new ones don't snap in quite as good, so he keeps the old pair for around the house. They were in his jewelry box with his good cufflinks and solid gold watch. And you know what? We figured the robbers must have had good teeth and didn't need them. She laughed heartily at her own witticism. And they took all my jewelry. The ring Big Mario gave me when Mario Jr. was born. They took cash and silver. She shook her head. But I still say, if Roz hadn't made us stay, the car actually started to turn over and stopped. Mario was going to try it again. But Roz says, if it dies on the highway in this rain, you could have an accident. She didn't want us to go back, and I think she saved our lives. Terrible, terrible. Do you know that 1 out of every 4 people in the United States will be the victim of a crime in their lifetime? Reagan had been about to blurt out about the correct statistics, if only to stem the flow of Immaculate's narrative, but clamped her lips just in time. On this voyage, Reagan thought it best to avoid talking about her occupation. The sommelier was at the table. Would anyone care for a cordial or a liqueur? Liqueur. With one voice, Kenneth, Dale, Sylvie, Cameron, and Gavin said no, almost knocking their chairs over as they jumped up. Veronica agreed to join the people for a creme de menthe. Reagan wondered how many miles there were from the Hudson River.